What happens when Hollywood's most volatile star meets late night, television's most relentless interrogator? You won't believe what unfolds when Alec Baldwin sits down with Stephen Colbert for what was supposed to be a routine promotional interview, only to witness one of the most explosive confrontations in late-night history. The tension that builds in this studio will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about celebrity interviews. Before we get into this incredible story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below, because you're not going to believe what unfolds when these two powerhouses clash in a way that nobody saw coming. The Late Show studio buzzed with its usual pre-show energy, but there was something different in the air that night. Alec Baldwin had arrived to promote his latest project, but from the moment he stepped backstage, crew members noticed an edge to his demeanor that hadn't been there in previous appearances. The seasoned actor, known for his quick wit and even quicker temper, seemed particularly wound up, pacing in his dressing room and repeatedly checking his phone with increasing agitation. Stephen Colbert, meanwhile, was in his element. The host had been riding high on recent ratings success and seemed particularly energized for this interview. His production team had prepared what they considered standard questions about Baldwin's career, his recent projects, and some light commentary on current events. But sources backstage later revealed that Colbert had also prepared some more pointed questions, the kind that had become his signature move with high-profile guests who found themselves in controversial situations. As the show began, the audience was treated to Colbert's typical monologue filled with his characteristic blend of political satire and cultural commentary. But those paying close attention noticed that several of his jokes seemed to have an extra bite, particularly when he made references to Hollywood accountability and the importance of taking responsibility for one's actions. The camera occasionally caught glimpses of Baldwin in the green room, watching the monologue on a monitor, his expression growing increasingly stern with each pointed comment. When it came time for the interview segment, Baldwin walked out to polite applause, but even the most casual observer could sense the tension radiating from both men as they shook hands. Colbert's smile seemed forced, while Baldwin's jaw was visibly clenched as he settled into the guest's chair. The host launched into his introduction with his usual flourish, but there was an undercurrent of something sharper in his tone. "Alec Baldwin, everybody," Colbert announced, his voice carrying that familiar late-night cadence. "Great to have you back. You know, it's been quite a year for you, hasn't it? New projects, new developments, lots of things happening in your world." Baldwin shifted in his chair, his famous blue eyes already showing signs of irritation. "Stephen, good to be here. Though I have to say, I'm hoping we can keep this focused on the work. You know, that's what I'm here to talk about." The warning in Baldwin's voice was unmistakable, but Colbert seemed to relish the challenge. He leaned back in his chair with that knowing smile that regular viewers had come to recognize as the precursor to a more aggressive line of questioning. Of course, the work is important, but you know, Alec, part of the work these days is also about the conversation around the work, isn't it? The responsibility that comes with being in the public eye. Baldwin's fingers drummed against the armrest of his chair, a nervous habit that those who knew him well recognized as a danger sign. "I think there's a difference between having a conversation and having an agenda. Stephen, I'm here to talk about my new film, not to be put on trial." "On trial?" Colbert's eyebrows shot up in mock surprise. "That's an interesting choice of words. I mean, nobody's putting you on trial here. This is just a conversation between two guys who've known each other for years." But since you brought up the subject of trials and accountability, the audience could feel the temperature in the room dropping. Baldwin's publicist, watching from the wings, was already reaching for her phone, likely preparing damage control measures. The actor himself sat forward in his chair, his voice taking on that familiar edge that had been heard in countless confrontations over the years. "Stephen, let me stop you right there. I came here tonight as a professional courtesy to promote a film that a lot of people worked very hard on. If you want to play journalist, maybe you should get yourself a journalism degree and a real job instead of hiding behind comedy." The words hit the studio like a thunderclap. Colbert's smile faltered for just a moment before returning, but now it carried a different quality entirely. The host's eyes narrowed as he processed what had just been said to him in front of an audience on his own show. The crew members, standing just out of camera range, exchanged glances, recognizing that they were witnessing something unprecedented. Hiding behind comedy, Colbert repeated, his voice still maintaining its professional calm, but with an unmistakable steel underneath. "That's funny, Alec, because I seem to remember you doing quite a bit of comedy yourself over the years. Saturday Night Live 30 Rock, but I guess when you're the one making the jokes, it's different, right?" Baldwin's face flushed red, and he gripped the arms of his chair so tightly that his knuckles went white. "Don't you dare compare what I do to this ambush journalism disguised as entertainment. At least when I was on SNL, I was honest about what I was doing." The accusation hung in the air, like smoke from a fired gun. Colbert's production team was frantically trying to decide whether to cut to commercial, but the host himself seemed determined to press forward. He leaned forward, matching Baldwin's aggressive posture, and when he spoke again, his voice carried the full weight of his years in political commentary. "Ambush journalism, Alec. I told you we were going to talk. I didn't promise you a puff piece. You're a public figure who's been in the news for some pretty serious reasons. Did you really think you could come on here and just pretend none of that happened?" Baldwin stood up abruptly, his chair rolling backward from the force. The audience gasped audibly, and several crew members stepped closer to the set, unsure of what might happen next. The actor towered over the seated host, his face contorted with rage. "You want to talk about serious? Let's talk about how you sit here night after night making jokes about people's real lives, real pain, real consequences, and you think that makes you some kind of truth teller. You're a parasite, Stephen. You feed off other people's misery for ratings." The insult struck home with devastating precision. Colbert's composure finally cracked, and he shot to his feet, bringing himself face to face with his guest. The two men stood there, separated by only a few feet, and the small table between them, both breathing heavily as the studio fell into complete silence. What happened next would change everything, but first, the tension that had been building between these two titans was about to reach a breaking point that nobody in that studio would ever forget. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only seconds. Camera operators held their positions, unsure whether to keep rolling or cut away. The studio audience sat frozen, many with their phones already out, sensing they were witnessing television history in the making. Baldwin's chest rose and fell with barely controlled fury, while Colbert's hands trembled slightly at his sides, his professional mask finally slipping to reveal the raw anger beneath. "You know what, Alec?" Colbert's voice was dangerously quiet. Now, the kind of calm that precedes a hurricane. "You want to call me a parasite? Fine, but at least I've never pretended to be something I'm not. At least I've never stood up in front of the world claiming to be a victim while refusing to take responsibility for my own actions." Baldwin's eyes flashed with a fury that seemed to come from somewhere deep and primal. "Responsibility? You want to talk about responsibility? You sit here every night making millions of dollars by turning real people's tragedies into punchlines. And you want to lecture me about responsibility?" The actor began, pacing now, his voice rising with each word. "You know what's really sick about this whole thing? You invited me here. You called my people. You said you wanted to have me on the show. And then you ambush me with this self-righteous garbage. That's not journalism, Stephen. That's entrapment." Colbert stepped around the small table that separated them, closing the distance even further. His voice carried the full weight of his years covering politics and controversy. "Entrapment. I asked you questions, Alec. That's what happens in interviews. If you can't handle questions about your public actions, maybe you shouldn't be in public." The crowd stirred uneasily. Several audience members were openly recording. Now, despite the show's strict no-phone policy, Baldwin's publicist had moved closer to the stage, her face pale with panic as she watched her client's career potentially imploding in real time. "My public actions." Baldwin's voice cracked with indignation. "You mean the accident? You mean the worst day of my life? You want to turn that into entertainment for your audience? You're sick, Stephen. You're genuinely sick." But Colbert wasn't backing down. If anything, Baldwin's emotional response seemed to fuel his determination to press harder. "I'm not turning anything into entertainment, Alec. You did that yourself when you kept taking jobs, kept appearing in public, kept acting like nothing happened. You want sympathy. Try showing some accountability first. The words hit Baldwin like physical blows. His face went from red to almost purple, and when he spoke again, his voice was a barely controlled roar. Accountability. I've been living with what happened every single day since it occurred. Every morning when I wake up, every night when I try to sleep. You think I need some late-night talk show host to tell me about accountability? Then why are you here? Colbert shot back, his own voice rising to match Baldwin's intensity. Why are you on a publicity tour if you're so devastated? Why are you promoting movies and appearing on talk shows if this is eating you alive? You can't have it both ways, Alec. You can't be the grieving, traumatized victim and the working Hollywood star at the same time. The accusation struck home with devastating accuracy. Baldwin stumbled backward as if he'd been punched, his hand reaching out to steady himself against his chair. For a moment, the anger in his eyes flickered and was replaced by something else. Pain perhaps, or recognition of an uncomfortable truth. But the moment passed quickly, and when Baldwin straightened up, his expression had hardened into something cold and dangerous. You know what your problem is, Stephen. You think being smart makes you right. You think having a platform gives you the moral authority to judge other people, but you're just another guy in a suit making money off other people's misery. Colbert's jaw clenched visibly. And you're just another celebrity who thinks fame makes you untouchable. But here's the thing about being in the public eye, Alec. People get to have opinions about your actions. People get to ask questions. And if you don't like that, maybe you should have thought about it before you decided to be a public figure. The exchange was escalating beyond anything either man had probably intended when they walked into the studio that night. Baldwin took a step closer to Colbert, and for a moment, it looked like the confrontation might turn physical. Security personnel, who had been watching nervously from the wings, began moving closer to the set. You want to know what I think? Baldwin's voice was low and menacing. Now I think you're a coward. I think you hide behind your desk and your jokes because you don't have the guts to face real life. You've never been tested, Stephen. You've never had to live with real consequences. You just get to sit here and judge everyone else from your safe little bubble. The personal attack seemed to hit Colbert harder than anything that had come before. His composure, which had been cracking throughout the exchange, finally shattered completely. A coward? You're calling me a coward? I've been doing this job for decades, taking on politicians, taking on power, taking on people who think they're above criticism. And you want to come on my show and tell me I'm a coward because I asked you uncomfortable questions. Baldwin laughed, but there was no humor in it, only bitter contempt. Taking on politicians? You mean making jokes about them? That's not courage, Stephen. That's just performance art for liberals who want to feel superior without actually doing anything. The political dimension of the attack seemed to push Colbert over an edge he hadn't known he was approaching. His voice, when he responded, carried a fury that nobody in that studio had ever heard from the usually controlled host. Performance art. You think what I do is performance art. I've spent my entire career trying to hold powerful people accountable, trying to speak truth to power, trying to make people think about the world they live in. And you want to dismiss that because it makes you uncomfortable to be asked real questions about your real actions. Baldwin was nodding now, but not in agreement in the way someone nods when their worst suspicions are being confirmed. There it is. There's the real Stephen Colbert. Not the funny guy, not the charming host, just another angry liberal who thinks he knows better than everyone else. The audience was completely silent now, transfixed by the raw hatred flowing between the two men on stage. This had gone far beyond a typical celebrity interview gone wrong. This was personal, visceral, and utterly unprecedented in the history of late-night television. Colbert stepped even closer, close enough that the cameras couldn't capture both men in the same frame anymore. You know what, Alec? You're right about one thing. I am angry. I'm angry at people who think fame gives them a free pass. I'm angry at celebrities who cry victim when they're asked to explain their actions. And I'm especially angry at people who come on my show and insult me for doing my job. Baldwin's voice dropped to barely above a whisper, but in the dead silence of the studio, every word carried clearly to the back row. Your job. Your job is to kiss celebrity ass and make people laugh. Everything else is just you trying to convince yourself that you matter. The insult hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Colbert's face went white, then red, and for a moment it looked like he might actually swing at his guest. But instead he did something that would prove to be even more devastating. Colbert began to laugh. Not the practiced professional laugh of a talk show host, but something darker, more genuine, and infinitely more chilling. It started as a low chuckle and built into something that made everyone in the studio uncomfortable. Baldwin's confident sneer faltered as he watched his host's reaction, clearly not expecting this response to his devastating insult. "You know what, Alec," Colbert said, his voice now carrying a calm that was somehow more terrifying than his previous anger. "You're absolutely right. I do try to convince myself that I matter. Because unlike you, I actually give a damn about something other than my own ego." Baldwin's mouth opened to respond, but Colbert held up a hand and the authority in. That gesture was so complete that even the enraged actor fell silent. No, you've had your say. Now it's my turn." Colbert's eyes were bright with a kind of righteous fury that nobody in that studio had ever seen before. "You want to know what really matters? Alec, what really matters is that when people trust you with a weapon, you don't kill them with it. What really matters is that when you're in a position of power and responsibility, you act like it. What really matters is that when you screw up, you own it instead of hiding behind lawyers and publicists and victim narratives." The studio was so quiet that the hum of the cameras seemed loud. Baldwin's face had gone completely pale, and his hands were shaking visibly now, but Colbert wasn't finished. "You want to call me a parasite? Fine, but at least I've never pointed a gun at someone and pulled the trigger. At least I've never killed someone and then spent the next 3 years acting like I was the victim. At least I've never stood up in front of cameras and cried about how hard my life is, while the family of the person I killed has to live with real consequences." Baldwin's breathing became ragged and he took a step backward, but there was nowhere to go. The cameras were still rolling. The audience was still watching, and Colbert was advancing on him with the relentless precision of a prosecutor delivering a closing argument. "You know what your real problem is, Alec? It's not that you had an accident. Accidents happen. Your problem is that you can't admit that it was your fault. You can't say the words, 'I killed someone and I'm responsible.' Instead, you lawyer up, you blame everyone else, you claim you're being persecuted, and then you have the unmitigated gall to come on my show and act like you're the wrong party." Baldwin's publicist was frantically gesturing from the wings, trying to get her client's attention, but Baldwin seemed frozen in place, transfixed by the verbal destruction being visited upon him. His mouth moved silently as if he were trying to form words but couldn't find any. "And you know what the really sick part is?" Colbert continued, his voice building to a crescendo. "You're still making money off of it. You're still booking roles. You're still doing interviews. You're still playing the celebrity game. You killed someone, Alec. You took a life. And your response was to hire a crisis management team and get back to work." The words hit Baldwin like physical blows. He staggered backward, his face contorting with what looked like genuine anguish. But when he finally found his voice, it came out as a roar of pure rage. "How dare you? How dare you stand there and judge me? You have no idea what I've been through. You have no idea what it's like to live with what I've lived with." Colbert didn't flinch. If anything, Baldwin's emotional breakdown seemed to strengthen his resolve. "What you've lived with? What about what her family has lived with? What about her husband, her son? What about the people who actually lost something that can't be replaced?" Baldwin's hands clenched into fists at his sides. "You think I don't think about them? You think I don't care? You sanctimonious piece of garbage. You sit there in your ivory tower making jokes about everything and everyone, and you think that gives you the right to destroy people." "I'm not destroying you, Alec," Colbert replied with devastating calm. "You destroyed yourself the moment you decided that your feelings mattered more than taking responsibility for your actions. I'm just pointing it out." The exchange had reached a level of personal viciousness that was almost unwatchable. Baldwin was shaking with rage, his face red and streaked with what might have been tears. But Colbert wasn't done. You want to know what really gets me about this whole thing? It's not even that you killed someone. People make mistakes, even fatal ones. It's that you've spent 3 years making it all about you, poor Alec, poor traumatized, victimized Alec. You've turned someone else's death into your personal tragedy, and that's disgusting. Baldwin exploded. Shut up. Just shut up. You don't know what you're talking about. You don't know anything about me or what I've been through. I know you're here promoting a movie instead of in therapy. Colbert shot back without missing a beat. I know you're more worried about your image than you are about the life you took. I know you're a coward who can't face the truth about what he did. Baldwin's self-control finally shattered completely. He lunged forward, not quite attacking Colbert, but getting close enough that security guards rushed onto the stage. But even as hands reached out to restrain him, Baldwin's voice rang out across the studio. You want the truth. The truth is that you're a bitter, angry little man who gets off on hurting people. The truth is that you're jealous of anyone who's actually accomplished something real. The truth is that you're nothing but a failed comedian who found a way to make money being cruel. Colbert stood his ground even as security moved between him and his guest. His voice, when he responded, was perfectly calm and all the more devastating. For it, the truth, Alec, is that you killed someone and you can't handle it. Everything else is just noise. The words seemed to drain all the fight out of Baldwin. He stood there for a moment, held back by security guards, looking suddenly older and smaller than he had just moments before. The cameras captured every detail of his face. The defeat, the rage, the desperate realization that he had lost this battle, completely and publicly. I'm done, Baldwin said quietly, his voice barely audible. Then louder, I'm done with this. I'm done with you. I'm done with all of this. He shrugged off the security guards and turned toward the wings. But before he could take more than a few steps, Colbert's voice stopped him one last time. That's right, Alec. Walk away. It's what you do best. Baldwin froze for a moment, his back to Colbert and the cameras. His shoulders shook, and for a second, it looked like he might turn around for one final confrontation. But instead he straightened up, squared his shoulders, and walked off the stage without looking back. The studio remained silent for a long moment after Baldwin disappeared into the wings. Colbert stood alone on the stage, breathing heavily, his carefully styled hair disheveled, his TIU. The audience sat in stunned silence, many still recording on their phones, all of them knowing they had witnessed something unprecedented in the history of television. Finally, Colbert turned to face the cameras directly. His voice, when he spoke, was horsero but steady. Ladies and gentlemen, Alec Baldwin, everybody will be right back after these messages. As the show cut to commercial, the studio erupted in chaos. Audience members were talking excitedly. Crew members were rushing around trying to figure out what to do next, and Colbert's production team was frantically making phone calls. The host himself walked off stage without saying another word, leaving behind a studio full of people who knew they had just witnessed television history. The confrontation was over, but the reverberations would be felt throughout the entertainment industry for months to come. Social media exploded with clips and commentary. Ratings plummeted as advertisers fled, and both men's careers would never be quite the same. But in that moment, in that studio, there was only the echo of harsh truth spoken in anger and the empty chair where Alec Baldwin had been sitting just minutes before.